We're going to start now. Good evening and welcome to the 6 o'clock series. My name is Josiah here. And, there we go. Got a really great applause. And we are the co-presidents of the Secular Student Alliance at IUP. And tonight's 6 o'clock series is the Young Atheist Survival Guide. The Secular Student Alliance at IUP is a group for atheists, agnostics, free-thinkers, humanists, and believe it or not, Christians are more than welcome to attend too, as well as any other people with religious persuasion. We're about embracing people and ideas independent of religion, and stimulating conversation about what we believe and why. And if you are interested in this topic or are here for a class, please note that the IUP libraries have prepared a list of references that are detailed on tonight's program. Also, feel free to submit Facebook and Twitter questions and responses to the 6 o'clock series Facebook and Twitter pages, which are also listed on the program. The program will last 90 minutes, and attendance vouchers are not offered until the program is concluded in exchange for your completed evaluation. Please include your professor's name or the evaluation if you are here for class.
Hemant Mehta, author of the Friendly Atheist blog, as well as 2 books, I Sold My Soul on eBay, and recently A Young Atheist Survival Guide, has been featured on both Fox News and CNN and continues to be active in secular groups nationwide. Please join me in welcoming Hemant Mehta.
All right, we'll see. Is this working? Can you guys hear me? All right. Thank you so much to Caroline and everyone here for inviting me. Let me start off by just asking a general question, because usually when I give this talk or a lot of talks, it's in front of like an all-atheist audience. So raise your hand here if you're like an open-out atheist. Okay, and if you don't mind sharing, how many of you are openly out and religious? That's a little more than the other side. Okay, cool. So it's about half and half. So the purpose of this talk and kind of this presentation I want to give is to kind of share with you what young atheists are up against, because I think this is a topic that really doesn't get covered in the media until recently, and I think it's becoming a bigger deal. So I want to just give you insight into that. I don't think anything in here is going to be controversial. I don't think. We'll see. So let me give you a little background about myself. My name is Hemant. I actually teach high school math for a living at a public school outside of Chicago. But outside of that, I do a lot of writing about religion and atheism specifically on the website friendlyatheist.com. And about 6 years ago now, maybe even more than that, about 6 years ago, I wrote this book called I Sold My Soul on eBay. And the gist of that book is I was not raised as a Christian. And by the time I was like 21 and done with college, or almost done with college, I had never actually attended a Christian church. I was raised in a religious family, but they weren't Christian, and so when I became an atheist, I kind of went from a religion most people haven't heard of to atheism, and there was nothing in between. And it's kind of hard to be an atheist in America and not have a good understanding of what it's like to be a Christian, or at least know what goes on in churches. So I put this thing up on eBay that said, you can all bid on where I go to church, and I will go to the church of the highest bidder's choosing. I'll donate the money to charity, it's not about that. And a pastor from Seattle won the auction. And I owed him every Sunday of church for a year. And he said, I don't want to do that and I'm a pastor. So let's make a deal. Why don't you go to like 10 churches around Chicago where I'm from? He'll pick them on my behalf. And I just go, I'll experience it, and I'll write about my experience on his ministry's website, and we'll call it a deal. So I'm totally fine with that. And what was interesting about this pastor is he said he was always upset at the way Christians evangelized about their faith. He's a proud Christian, but he just hated the whole bait and switch sort of thing, like, be my friend, come to church, that sort of thing. So one thing he really liked to do is he would stand outside big churches, and he would find passersby as they're coming along, and he'd say, hey, are you doing anything for the next 30 minutes, hour? I will give you $25 if you sit in this church service of a church that he's never been to. I'll give you that much money to sit inside the service. All you got to do for me is fill out this evaluation. And then give it to me when you leave. I'll give you the money. I'm not going to take your contact information or bother you after that. Just give it to me. And he asks questions like, what do you think about the pastor's sermon? What did you think about the seats you were in? How was the choir? Did anything the pastor said touch you emotionally? Would you come back to this place? And then he would take all those surveys, and then he'd go up to the pastor, and he'd say, hey, you want to know what non-religious people think about your service? Because you're trying to bring them in. Well, here's what they all said about you, so what are you going to do about it? And so when he heard that an atheist would go to church, he jumped at that chance. The reason I bring this up is I ended up going to a lot of churches on his behalf, and then I went to even more when I wrote this book. And after the whole experience was kind of done, I had a chance to talk about going to like 30 churches across the country in front of an all-Christian college. And I got an email from this kid, and he said, hey, I am a leader of the student council. I'm like the student body president of my super, super Christian college. And every year we try to bring in a speaker whose views are totally different from that of the student body. So a couple years ago we brought in a feminist. And a year ago we brought in a Democrat. We figured, hey, why not an atheist? And he said, can you come and talk to us about, you're going to church? P.S. Don't tell anybody, I'm an atheist too. I go here because my dad works here and I get free tuition, so I figured I'll just ride it out for a few years and then go do whatever I want. So it turns out, this guy, realize he had to sign like a statement of faith. If anyone finds out he's an atheist, he could get expelled. So the only people that knew that he was an atheist were like him, a couple of his close friends who were religious, and like one faculty member who he confided in. And so after I gave this talk, I met up with them, and one of the women who was the guy's friend, she was a Sunday school teacher, and I'm a high school teacher, so we teach, so we have that in common. And she said that the way it works at her church is the people who run the program, they tell her this is what you have to teach the 8-year-old, the kids she taught. And one time, and she has a little flexibility in how she teaches stuff. So one time she was given a stack of gingerbread men. And her job was to have the kids draw what a Christian looked like. And she was like, that's weird, because Christians don't all look alike, so what are they going to draw? You can't even tell by looking at someone if they're a Christian. And they're like, And then here's some more gingerbread men, and then have the kids draw what it's like to not be a Christian. He's like, oh, this is bad. And so she tried to explain to these kids, you can't know what someone believes just by looking at them. You have to talk to them and have a conversation. And she tries to tell this to the 8-year-olds. So good luck with that. And then she saved one of the kids' drawings for me because she figured I would appreciate it. So this is one kid's drawing of what a good Christian looks like. So, I don't know if you can tell, he has a banana in his hand, and if you've ever seen this video online of Kirk Cameron and his buddy talking about how banana is an atheist's worst nightmare, because God obviously created it for our eating habits. You can't really read it, but he's saying, I love God. He has a cross in his hand, nicely colored in, tucked in shirts. His hair is combed over. I don't know if you can see his freckles. Really nice kid up there, right? That's what happens when you believe in Christ. And here's the same kid drawing what you look like if you don't believe in Christ. So that's what the atheists look like. That's alcohol in his hand. That's tattoos that are so badly done that they're sticking out of his skin. He's smoking something. I don't know if you can read it. It says, cussing, God doesn't exist. He didn't bother to do his hair. I don't know why the clothes aren't even colored in. That is weird. He ripped his sleeves off in anger. He has a unibrow. That's just unfair. But here's the thing. This kid's 8. Who is teaching this kid that this is what a Christian looks like and this is what an atheist looks like? I don't think his parents are just sitting him down and saying this is what the difference is. And I don't think this kid's pastor's doing that. But the kid's picking it up from somewhere. And what's more than likely to happen in a town where you go to like an all-Christian school and maybe an all-Christian high school and maybe even an all-Christian college is that you don't really meet a lot of people who challenge any of these theories because, if you live in an all-Christian environment, I don't think it's hard to believe that all Christians look like that. So the thing is, when this kid grows up, maybe goes to high school or college where he meets people who are not Christian, there's a problem if the first thought going through that kid's head is, that person's not a Christian, that must be what they're like. Everything about that right-hand drawing is bad. And I don't want to be bad, and I don't want to be associated with bad people, so the answer is avoid them, or try to convert them, or something like that. It's not good in any case. It's not just a state rule. I think that sort of attitude that if you believe in God, you're good, and if you don't believe in God, you're somehow immoral or bad, that is such a big issue that's going on in our society. And what's happened because of that is that a lot of atheists have had a lot of issues dealing with that in high school, maybe even younger, and definitely in college. So that's kind of what I want to talk to you about. Let me share one particular story with you. This happened in 2004. There was a girl named Nicole. She was a 9th grader, and her family had just moved to this really rural part of Oklahoma. And if you're a high school freshman and you just moved to a new place, and I've been through that myself, that is not easy because you just lost all of your friends and you're about to enter high school and you don't know anybody. So what Nicole did is to try to make friends, is she tried out for the high school football team. And she actually made the team, and she was actually really good. And she said the boys on the team accepted her, and they treated her well, and it was great. Then in the winter, she tried out for girls basketball, and she made that. But here's where it gets weird. So the first game of the season, they played their game. I don't even know if they won or lost. Now, when I was growing up and I played soccer, like whatever Little League soccer is, at the end of the game, win or lose, you had to go to midfield and shake hands with the opposing team, say, good game, good game, good game, and then if you were my team, you went home and you cried. Nicole's issue is they played the game, and then her team went to the center court, and they held hands, and the other team joined them at center court and held hands, and they all said the Lord's Prayer, which was a little weird because she wasn't expecting that. And then they said the Pledge of Allegiance, which has the words under God in it, and Nicole wasn't expecting that. And so she went up to her coach and she said, Coach, I don't believe in God. Like, I think it's disrespectful. Not that they're doing that. She actually had no problem with them saying the Lord's Prayer. She said, I'm an atheist and I don't believe in this stuff. I think it would be disrespectful of me to join their group. So what should I do? And the coach was just like, well, go to the locker room then. So she went. And then the next couple days later, the coach of their team actually met with the superintendent of the district and the principal of the high school because this was an issue that needed to be dealt with. And the resolution was that Nicole needed to be kicked off the team. So that's what they did. And they didn't even have the decency to tell her this. The way she found out, she looked at the roster for the next game a couple days later, and her name wasn't on it. And she's like, hey coach, why am I not playing in the game? He said, well, you stole someone's sneakers and you're bad for team morale. She's like, I didn't steal sneakers. I borrowed sneakers from another kid, and then I gave it back, and she said, thank you. And why am I bad for team morale? Because I run laps early. It doesn't make any sense. And so, whatever, didn't matter. She was kicked off the team. Now, imagine if you're a freshman in high school at a school with a really small population. Everyone knows that she got kicked off the team, and they all know why she got kicked off the team, too. So now word starts spreading. People call her nasty names. People call her a little devil. According to the court documents from this story, the principal's own son would see her in the hallway and say, the very sight of you makes me want to grab a gun. Her teachers, when she would be in class and she wanted to take a bathroom break, her teachers would say things like, I hate that girl. This was 2004, so John Kerry was running against George W. Bush. Nicole's like 14 at the time. She couldn't vote, but I guess word came out that she would have voted for John Kerry if she could vote. And so kids started calling her gay. And then they found out her parents were mixed race, so they called her whatever nasty word you call people who are of mixed race. So this goes on. And what does Nicole do after all this? She sticks it out freshman year, and she tries out for the girls' basketball team again her sophomore year. And so she plays the games, they do the first game of the season, and the exact same scenario happens again. And by the way, I'm bringing this up because this story did not get much coverage at all. No one really knew about this unless maybe you were an atheist involved or you heard about the lawsuit, because their parents did file a lawsuit. The only time it came to more national attention is because 2020 did a segment on this girl. So I want to show you a clip from that segment. I don't know if it's possible to turn off the lights here at all, but let me show you this segment from 2020, and let's see if you can hear this okay.
Then came basketball season, but in the first game, everything changed because after the game, the girls gathered to recite the Lord's Prayer.
I didn't think they had religion in sport So when it came to basketball, they would pray before and after practices, they would pray during games, and, praying was a tradition for them, and that's what they said.
Even the other team joins in. And from the stands, school officials too, Mrs. Nicole.
All the teachers that work at that school and the administration have their heads down there saying the Lord's Prayer with the kids. Coach has his head down. It's a thing that everyone does.
It was uncomfortable for Nicole because she's an atheist.
So did you say, no, I'm an atheist, I
Yeah.
won't do it?
Well, I told the coach, I was like, no, I don't believe in God, I'm an atheist. So he's like, go to the locker room then.
Nicole says once she said she was an atheist.
Your relationship with the other kids, Jim.
Yeah.
I'm going to sacrifice. And I don't like that. It's just
Students called her names, she said.
They would call me devil worshiper. I'd walk down the hall, people would laugh at me. They would look at me really weird, stare me down.
Then she says teachers joined in.
what would they say?
This is your Christian country, and you don't let me get out.
When kids hear a teacher say when she goes to the bathroom, I hate that girl, what are you telling the kids at school? That's a gang, man. Religious gang.
School administrators kicked Nicole off the basketball team. They said she was bad for team morale and that she'd stolen another student's sneakers.
Did you take the other girls?
I borrowed it, and people saw me give it back to her, and she said thank you.
You were late to practice nearly every day.
Actually, I was early to practice every day, and I ran my laps before the coach got there.
A year later, Nicole was allowed back on the team. This time, as the prayer started, Nicole stayed outside the circle.
If I just stood outside and said the Pledge of Allegiance
Without the under God.
without the other God.
The next school day, she was suspended. Fearing for their daughter's safety at school, Nicole's parents decided to homeschool all three of their kids. In place of sports, Nicole now focuses more time on music. She taught herself to play classical piano. And she joined dad, brother, to start a family. They're getting paid gigs.
I miss school, but I don't want to go back to that school. My friend goes back to that school for 2 days, and I couldn't handle it. And there was a new kid there, so he's like, oh, I heard about you. You're that dirty little troublemaker atheist.
So for now, Nicole's dreams are on hold.
By the way, if you saw in that clip when she's back in the circle and she's standing outside of it, at the very end of that, one of the girls on her team put her arm around Nicole's shoulder as they were done and walking back to the locker room. And Nicole said later, what that girl on her team said to her is, I forgive you and God forgives you. So, that's a heartbreaking story. And here's what I'm not suggesting at all that all Christians would have acted like that or that that is typical of anything that goes on. But that sort of thing does happen in certain parts of the country. And certainly if you're an atheist in certain parts of the country, that is the sort of thing that a lot of people have had to put up with. Now, that is slowly starting to change. And that's kind of the upside to this. That happened in 2004, and other than that one clip from 2020, there really wasn't a lot of coverage of Nicole's story. Now, what's happened in like the decades since then? A lot of stuff has changed, and this is stuff you may have heard about. By the way, Catherine Stewart is this author, came out with this book called The Good News Club. She actually mentioned Nicole in her book about how hard it is to be an atheist in some of these schools. Many students know that prayer is a part of what they got to do. They know the locker room is no place for dissent, and refusal to participate could be construed as a sign of lack of commitment to the team. They've learned they have to pray to play. That happens in a lot of schools. And we could discuss whether that's legal or illegal, but in a lot of schools, and not just ones in Oklahoma, not just ones in the South, but schools across the nation, there are places where if you are an atheist on their team, and the majority of the team and the majority of the administration is Christian, that sort of thing doesn't apply. So, here's where I'm going with this. This stuff is starting to change, and this is stuff you may have heard about. There are all these studies now that are showing that younger people are less religiously affiliated than ever before. This is a study that came out by the Pew Forum a couple years ago. Like a year or two ago. And what you're looking at right now, this bottom red line, that is the greatest generation. They were the ones born in like the 1920s or before that. And you can see that the number of people who are either atheist or agnostic or just, they don't believe in something specific. They don't belong to a religion. They might be spiritual but not religious. That's 5%. There are very few people who are not religious. And the yellow is the silent generation, 28 to 45. Let's get to the baby boomers born like in the 50s and early 60s. Getting to 13% of them now say they are not religious. And by the way, one thing to notice is that those numbers are pretty steady over time. Like in the late 70s, the baby boomers were about 13% not religious. And even now, decades later, it's still about 13%. And then you get to Generation X, so born up through 1980, 20%. And if you look at the millennial generation, people who were born after 1981, so I'm guessing a lot of students in this room, that's at 26%. That is a huge change from just generations ago. According to this, a quarter of students don't belong to any specific religion. They may believe in God, but they don't go to church, they don't belong to any specific religious community. That's a huge difference from before. And that means there's a lot more atheists and non-religious people out there. And this is one that made news over the summer. They asked people, do you ever doubt the existence of God? And again, if you ask the greatest generation, almost 90% of them said, I never doubt the existence of God. I have complete 100% faith in God. And then you go to the silent generation, still a lot of people. Boomers, it's around the 80s somewhere, and Generation X, it's hovering around the 80s still. But then you go to the millennial generation, and look at what happens at the right. That thing is dropping quickly. It's at like the upper 60s or something like that. That means a lot more students than ever before are questioning God's existence. That's happening, and that drop is scaring a lot of pastors right now too, because it means a lot of people are walking away from church and maybe walking away from faith altogether. So these are big changes from a couple generations ago. So here's the question everyone wants to know. Like, why are all these people walking away from their church? Why are they leaving their faith? And they're not all becoming atheists, but they are leaving church. Christian, the Gallup polling organization, there's a Christian version of that called the Barna Group. And they actually asked people who had left the church, why did you leave? And they compiled all these things. There's a great book written by the head of Barna. It's called Unchristian. And they talk about why young people are leaving the church. Can anyone raise your hand? Why do you think people have left the church? What reasons did they give? Social context. So yeah, it's like on the social issues, they disagreed with them. Any other reasons? Yeah. They see hypocrisy in the church. Other ones? Yes, in that.
Science education?
Science education is a big issue. Yes? They're bored in church. In the back, yeah.
They meet different types of people who might question them and then teach them.
I couldn't hear that.
Just meeting different types of people who come here that aren't Christians that basically change their opinion.
Okay, so they meet a lot of people who aren't Christian and their opinions change over time. That's a fair point to make too. So these are the top 6 reasons David Kinnaman of Barna gave in his book. It's too insular. They only hang around other Christians, and there's you can't be friends with other people. Too irrelevant. They're not addressing issues that people really need to deal with. Too anti-science. Yeah, evolution versus creationism or intelligent design, that's a big issue. Too sex negative. The whole idea that you have to be abstinent before marriage, purity rings, all of that stuff. And just the whole idea of sex education in schools being only abstinence all the time, not a more comprehensive sex education. Too exclusive, similar to the insular one. And too anti-doubt. This was a big one, meaning that people were doubting God, but church wasn't the place to go to get their questions answered. What do you do if you doubt? What happens if God isn't answering my prayers? Those were questions they could not get good answers to from their pastors. In fact, they were told, just shut up and have faith. Everything will be, that doesn't help when you have questions. So a lot of these are reasons. If you ask a lot of young atheists why they're not religious anymore, they might give you any one of these. Personally, I think the biggest one might be the gay marriage issue right now. This is kind of the same issue. This came out in 2011. what percent of people favored gay marriage? And if you look at the very bottom, the 12% number, it's white evangelical Protestants. Black Protestants, a little better. The white mainline Protestants, 53%. The religiously unaffiliated, and again, that doesn't mean atheists, it just means, all right, they might believe in something, but they don't belong to a particular faith. 66%. And actually, if you look specifically at people who said, I don't believe in God, that number was 80% in 2010. So on the issue of gay marriage, there's not just a difference of opinion between like evangelical Christianity and people who aren't religious. I mean, this is a wide, huge chasm. And if you support marriage equality, the church isn't the place you want to be. And I'm not even getting into whether gay marriage is right or wrong. I'm just saying that on an issue that a lot of young Christians will probably tell you, I don't see what the big deal is about gay people getting married. They know that the church isn't the place to go. In the past 5 or 6 years, I've probably met more Christians who agree with me on the social issues than they've agreed with other Christian pastors. And it doesn't mean they agree with me on the God thing, but we're probably closer on the social issues. And because of that, and because the church isn't adapting to that, the church is losing a lot of people. Not to get political, but I think you could probably say the same thing about the Republican Party in general. Like, they're worried about losing the youth vote, and it's because the Democrats are probably more in line with what most younger people are thinking. So this is a big issue, and it's a reason why a lot of people are leaving church. So I think this is one of the reasons we're seeing this decline in why people are being part of church, why they're not religious anymore. Here's another reason that is big. And the reason is that Christians actually helped us out. In the 1980s, late 70s, 1980s, the religious right wanted more than anything to start Christian clubs at college campuses. And how many Christian groups are there at IUP right now? Several. At least several. If you go to like Ohio State University, like a really big public school, the number of groups for Christian students is probably 60 or 70. Like, there's the Christian dentists, there's the Christian lawyers. I mean, there's a whole lot of places to go if you're a Christian student. But those didn't exist like 30 years ago. And what they did is they actually filed lawsuits. They got taken to the Supreme Court saying, we don't think the school ought to discriminate against us starting groups just because we're religious. And the Supreme Court said, you're right. If you're in college, the school cannot say no to you because you're a Christian group. And all of a sudden, you started seeing like this blossoming of groups like Campus Crusade for Christ and other Christian groups. And then a few years later, the same thing happened for high school students with this thing called the Equal Access Act. Like, Ronald Reagan signed this act because basically what they said is, hey, if they can not discriminate in college against Christian groups, they shouldn't discriminate at the high school level either. Just because you're a religious group, you should be allowed to have an after-school club for Christians at public high schools. And the Supreme Court agreed. They said, yeah, that is totally fine. You can have that. But here's what that did. When you say you can't discriminate against Christians for having their clubs, it also means you can't discriminate against atheists for having their clubs. It means you can't discriminate against the Gay Straight Alliance in high school. It means you can't stop the Hindu group or the Muslim group from meeting in college. And so what you saw is this act passed. And what you're seeing now, the Secular Student Alliance, which is the group here, it's one of the national umbrella organizations for high school and college atheist groups. What we've seen since the fall of 2003 on the left, which is about 40 or 50 groups total across the country, that number in the fall of 2012 is now about 360-some groups, and I think now in the spring it's over 400. That's what started to happen. Not only do these groups start forming, people hear about them and they want to start their own group, and then they start spreading. So not only is that number growing, and that shows no sign of stopping, here's what I find interesting. This is what happened in high school specifically, because we never saw any high school atheist groups even a few years ago. So in 2007, on the far left, there were probably 2 high school groups for atheists in the country that were at least affiliated with the Secular Student Alliance. And then, over the course of several years, they started forming. And again, it's like I said, if you're in a position like Nicole, it's really hard to be an atheist at a high school, much less coming out and saying, hey, I want to have a group for a lot of atheists. That's hard to do. Those groups started forming. The Secular Student Alliance in 2011, they actually got a grant to hire somebody to just run the high school side of things. And so here's what we saw. I don't have the data for 2011, but I do have the data for 2012. This is what happened. That number's at like 47. It's currently at, I believe, 66, maybe 67 high school groups around the country. This is what's been happening in the past several years. And I would argue a whole big part of why these groups are forming are some of those reasons that we saw why people are leaving the church, especially gay marriage. Every high school student in a big enough public school will tell you they know a friend of theirs who is gay or lesbian. They don't see it's a big deal. They want to be a part of a group like this. That's what's happening. And also anti-science in some other states. If you go to certain states where they still have battles about evolution and creationism and stuff like that, you see a lot of these groups forming. So where are these groups forming? It turns out if you go to like a very liberal state, like Rhode Island maybe, or Maine, or I don't know, Washington State, there are very few atheist groups. Like it's really hard to start one. But in Texas, and Alabama, and Mississippi, lots of atheist groups. Because you need them. And by the same measure, I think anyone from like Campus Crusade for Christ will tell you they have a great time starting up groups in like Oregon. But they have a hard time probably in Texas, because why do you need one when everyone around you is pretty religious? So this is a big shift in what's been happening. So why else have things become better for high school atheists over time? Another reason is the media loves stories about controversy. And there's nothing more controversial than a young atheist surrounded by religious people. I got a call from the Chicago Tribune a couple years ago, and they said, hey, we want to do a story about atheists. Can you direct us to some college atheist groups? I'm like, yeah, there's a bunch of them in the area. I'll let you know. They actually visited these groups. They spoke with the students there. They attended their meetings. And the story that they actually had on the front page of the Chicago Tribune's magazine, all you see are smiling atheists. That's the story. They're atheists, and they're nice, and they're not evil, and they're trying to start groups. That's the entire story. It's not like they were doing anything else. It's just that they exist, and that's a big thing. This is an interesting one. This is high school. This is one of the few high school atheist groups. They got written up in the New York Times. And it's at Rutherford High School in Florida. And what was fascinating about this article is there's not a lot of high school atheist groups. This is from 2011. There weren't a lot of high school groups at the time, maybe a dozen. And this is one of them. And it just started one year, and it's gotten bigger and bigger. But what was really interesting is at the very end of the article, it closed with a couple statements that were really interesting. There are students who do not want their parents to know they belong to an atheist club. I tell my mother I'm an ocean club, one girl said. If I were a parent, what the heck is ocean club? I don't know. But apparently it worked as a substitute. Here's another one. A girl said her dad was in the Navy, and I wouldn't want to fight with him. She asked that her name not be used for fear it would hurt her father. I don't want us to grow apart over this. When you hear about those stories, whether you're an atheist or religious, that sort of thing is heartbreaking. I wouldn't want a Christian person to say that, to say, like, I can't tell my parents where I'm at because they would get really upset if they found out I was reading the Bible after school. I wouldn't want to see that, and I hope no one wants to see this either. What was really fascinating about this group, too, is the way they held their groups. The faculty sponsor actually said about 25% of the students who come to their meetings, and they get like 30, 40 students coming to these meetings every week, 25% of them are religious, but they're really interested in knowing what the other side says and thinks. And it's really cool because you don't want a discussion where everyone just nods their head and agrees with everything you say. So it's a great conversation. They actually talked about one girl who said she attended the atheist meeting after school, and she attended the Christian club after school, and she did that for like a few months in the first semester. And by Christmas, she decided she wanted to just be part of the atheist club. Interesting. The other thing that was really fascinating was I spoke to the faculty sponsor of this group. His name is Michael Creamer, and what he told me was, for years, he had been teaching at Rutherford for over 30 years. Tenured, a lot of positive, like, kids love him. He has a great reputation at the school. But he said for years, when he teaches, like, I don't know how many of you have, like, international baccalaureate classes, but there's a philosophy class that you gotta take in that program. He teaches the philosophy class, and religion's a part of that discussion. And when kids would ask him, Mr. Creamer, what do you believe in? he would always say, you know what, it's not about me, I don't want to tell you what I believe in, this is about you guys. I just want to moderate, so, you guys discuss what you believe and what you believe. And he thought that was the politically correct thing to say. But when those kids asked their other teachers at the school, where do you go to church? What do you believe? They never said the same thing. They always said, oh, well, I go to this church, and you should come to that church one day. It's like, why am I hiding who I am when those teachers are more than open about it? So eventually, a couple years ago, we started saying, if a student asked him, where do you go to church? He would say, I don't go to church, and my wife doesn't go to church. We're both atheists. And that's it. And the students were like, oh, because they don't know. But then a couple of them came up to him and said, we want to start a group for atheists. Can you be our faculty sponsor? And he said, yes. And he said after this article came out, he got so much feedback from other students and teachers who have been in the same position, where they don't talk about it, and with students who are afraid to mention it, that he actually got so much feedback from them just saying, thank you for being public about this. And he got sent a lot of books from atheists saying, hey, if your kids ever want to check out a book, because it's very hard to bring the God delusion home from the library when your parents might see it. So they gave him books so he would have like an in-school library if the kids wanted to see anything. So that's a big deal. This is an interesting story too. Now we've actually gotten savvy about this because it turns out in any school, if there's a drama club or a chess club, anything that's not curricular at your high school, you can have an atheist club. And it's been the Secular Student Alliance's job to kind of inform students that you have a right to have a club if they have other extracurricular clubs. If there's a Bible club at your school, you can have an atheist club. You can have a Gay Straight Alliance. But this kid, Brian Lisco in Texas, he tried to form a group, and he was delayed for 3 months because the principal just kept pushing it off, and he couldn't get a meeting to find out how to start a group. And then she said, fine, you can have your group, but you got to call it a philosophy club, and you can't affiliate with the Secular Student Alliance. Like, they would never tell the Christian group, call yourselves like the athletes who like Tim Tebow and then not affiliate with like Fellowship of Christian Athletes. They would never say that. But it happened to him. So, again, what do you do if you're in this position? You contact the media and you say, hey, here's an atheist who just wants to start a club and the school's not letting him. So USA Today started emailing the principal. Why won't you let this kid have his club? We're writing a story on this. What's the position? Why are you not letting him do it? After 5 days of emails, the reporter from USA Today got an email that said, he can have his club, period. And so this is the article. After a request for comment, the school abruptly granted him the Secular Student Alliance Club on Tuesday. But again, it's a story, it's a conflict, it shouldn't be a conflict. You can totally disagree with everything they stand for, but they're allowed to exist, and that's a story. One more that I found interesting. This is a girl named Crystal in Tennessee. She was like a model student. She had a great GPA. She was like captain of the swim team. She was also an editor for their high school paper. She wrote an article for their school paper about how hard it is to be an atheist in Tennessee. And she actually documented a lot of things that were going on in her classes that are totally illegal. Like just the way the teachers talked about the Bible and the way they used Bible references in class, it crossed the line, I thought. But she wrote this article, and the school would not let her publish it because they said it would be too controversial. Which is weird, because I've been part of a few high school newspapers, and you're starving for articles. I've never heard anyone say, no, people will talk about that too much, we can't have that. But she tried to do it, so again, what do? You alert the press and say the school doesn't want her to publish an article because she's an atheist, which really was what this was all about. So what was awesome is that the Knoxville News-Sentinel, the local paper, not only did a story on her, they published her article on their website, giving it way more exposure than it would have had otherwise. So again, this is one of the things that's happening, and this is one of the ways young atheists are actually fighting back against their administration, which is to say, if you don't give us the same rights that you give other students at this school, we're not just gonna, you can contact lawyers and stuff, and we'll help you get lawyers, but all you gotta do is contact people who will put some fear in them, contact the media and say, hey, why won't you let this kid have the group that every other kid can do? And that becomes a story, and it happens so often. On my website, I read about stories dealing with atheism, and I hear so many stories just like this, where it's like, we wanted to start a group, but the school said we couldn't do it, and they don't give us a good reason. There was one story that happened a few years ago where a student kept trying to start a group, and the principal kept pushing it off, because she knew he was a senior, and if she kept pushing it off to like April or May, he would eventually realize, oh, I'm going to graduate in 2 weeks. I guess I won't do it. But the kid started the group anyway, like a week left to spare just so he could do it. But this is the sort of thing, like, why does this happen? This should not be an issue. If you want to discuss things that they are doing in the club or things that you might have a problem with, that's a separate issue. But forming the club itself, just announcing to the world that, hey, there are atheists at the school, they exist, they want to discuss religion, that apparently is controversial in a lot of places. But when you hear about these stories, and they spread online, on Reddit, through email, through newspapers, students hear about it. And they see like, oh, she can start a group at her school. I want to start a group at mine. Let me see what I have to do to make that happen. And that's why you're starting to see this rise as well. Here's another reason things are getting better for atheists. You're seeing actually sympathetic atheist characters on TV. If we can close the lights one more time. On the TV show Glee, one of the most popular shows on TV, they actually feature dialogue I don't think I would have seen a few years ago. You don't have to know about the show, but know that the character who's about to talk is one of the ones you're supposed to like.
Your voice is stunning, but I don't believe in God. You don't profess people who is understated mind. And God's not like Santa Claus for adults. Otherwise, God's kind of a jerk, isn't he? It makes me gay and has his followers going around telling me it's something that I chose, as if someone would choose to be mocked every single day of their life. Right now, I don't want to have a Father. I want my brother back.
But Kurt, how do you know for sure? You can't prove that there's no God.
You can't prove there's a magic teapot floating around the dark side of the moon with a dwarf inside of it that reads romance novels and shit's lightning out of its boobs, but it seems pretty likely doesn't.
Scott and me will talk. We shouldn't be talking like this. It's not right.
So, but you all can believe whatever you want to. I can't believe something I don't appreciate your thoughts. I don't want your prayers.
I don't think I would have seen that dialogue anywhere a few years ago, but I've actually seen it on like ABC family sitcoms, where they have like a character who's an awesome character and you already like them and you realize that they don't believe in God. Or they're having a crisis of faith and it's not treated as that person needs to be saved or cured. It's just like, oh, you don't believe in God. All right. And that's a huge difference. Okay, so last thing I want to share with you. How are people making things better within the atheist community for high school students and young atheists in general? This is a kid named Damon. Last spring, maybe 2 springs ago, he was graduating from high school, and he knew that in his graduation they did an invocation prayer. And he thought that was illegal. So he asked his principal, I don't think we should be having one of those because it's a public school and we shouldn't be having a prayer at a high school graduation. So if you don't take it out of there, I'm going to let the ACLU know about it. And so the principal said, we're not going to do anything. The ACLU said, well, yes, you are. And the school said, fine, we'll take it away. What happened then is when the school community found out they were not going to say the invocation prayer, not only did Damon get bullied at school, one of his own teachers trashed him in the media. This is a local paper. T. Quinn has been on the staff of the high school for almost 25 years, and at the very bottom. And what's even more sad is that this is a student who really hasn't contributed anything to their graduation or to their classmates. I've been teaching for years. I have a lot of students I don't really like. I would not trash them in public. I don't know a lot of people who would. But that's the sort of thing, it's like, well, if he's an atheist, fine, we can say whatever we want about him because everyone's on our side anyway. Damon did something really tough. He took a stand on something that was very unpopular, even though he was right, and the courts agreed with him. But what happened then is, on my website we said, I wonder if we can get a scholarship for Damon. Can we raise funds so that at least he can go to school somewhere and not have to worry about that issue? And we ended up raising like over $30,000 for him in the span of a few weeks, which was kind of weird and awesome and crazy. And then last year, something even crazier happened. This is a girl named Jessica. And Jessica, to me, she reminds me a lot of Nicole from the beginning of the basketball season. Because Jessica went to a school in Rhode Island, and in their auditorium at this public high school, they had 2 murals on the side of the auditorium, and one of them is this big prayer, like, we praise the Lord that He will help us in school and academics and athletics, amen, something like that. And she said, oh, as a freshman, she said, that doesn't belong there. So she started a Facebook group that said we should take that mural down. And that actually got picked up by the ACLU, I believe it was the ACLU, and they said, yeah, you're right, that shouldn't be there. So they actually filed a lawsuit against the school. They said, you gotta take that thing down. That is promoting religion in school. You can't do that. And so, eventually, this thing got taken to court, and the school district had to decide, do we keep that up there and face this lawsuit, or do we just take it down? And ultimately, they said, no, we're keeping it up. We're fighting this battle. So it went to court. And in January of last year, the court ruled that Jessica was right. That mural had to be taken down. And the school decided, after a lot of controversy, we're not going to appeal, we'll just take down the mural. After that ruling got issued, that girl went through hell and back. And imagine, 2004 is when Nicole's basketball thing happened. No one's paying attention, really, at all. When Jessica's thing happened, it happened for a year in court, and this was all online everywhere. Jessica's on Twitter. She started getting death threats. She started getting rape threats on Twitter. She started getting bullied at school, very similar to the way Nicole was at her school in Oklahoma. But the difference was, now, people were on her side, and they knew about it. When the school board had meetings, people would drive in from out of state to support Jessica in trying to get this mural down from her school. Whenever there were these Twitter threats against her, there were people online who would monitor her Twitter feed and the responses going to her. They would take screenshots so they would know who's saying these things. They would pass them along to the local police station, and the police acted on it. They suspended kids who were making those threats against her. One of the atheist groups, a national group, actually wanted to send her flowers after she won her case. So they asked a lot of local Rhode Island florists, can you send her flowers? 4 different companies said, we're not going to send her flowers. They had to go out of state to send her flowers. That's how ridiculous this got. And needless to say, she got harassed at school. On the radio, they had a local state representative say, that girl, this high school student, is an evil little thing for what she's doing. Like a local representative who represents her said she's a nasty kid because she was fighting this thing that everyone really liked. So in response, what did the internet do? They made shirts that said evil little thing, branded it on the shirts and started selling them to raise money for a scholarship for Jessica. And those things sold like hotcakes. So we had a fundraiser on my site, and this time we raised almost $50,000. And then people gave money to the organization that was holding on to it, plus you had the money from the t-shirts. And last year I got to give Jessica this giant check for like $62,000. And by the way, Damon, the kid I just mentioned, about his graduation invocation prayer, he had to not go to school. He got kicked out of his house by his parents, and he moved in with his brother. He didn't go to school for a year. He started school this last fall. Jessica is a senior this year. She had to leave her high school because of all the bullying. She's not at school this year, but hopefully she'll be going to school next year. But this is the sort of thing that students are up against. And again, it's very similar to what Nicole went through in Oklahoma. The difference is now these students have supporters. Now they have people who got their back and will fight for them and defend them and stand up for them and help them out when things are not going well. And this is a huge change from what has happened before. So, what do we do now with it? Oh, by the way, let me show you one more clip. If you turn off the lights one more time. And I want to show you this only because you saw the Nicole clip from 2020. Jessica appeared on CNN to talk about her case as well. And I just want you to hear not only how articulate she is in presenting her case, but how she handles being the subject of all these threats and the harassment.
We were just showing some pictures of angry parents who were very loudly talking about the Pledge of Allegiance and saying the Pledge of Allegiance in this meeting that clearly became very full of anger. What do you make of the hostility that's come out around this? You've gotten death threats, is that correct?
That's correct.
And
it's been really difficult, obviously, just to constantly have this feeling of hatred towards me in my community. The meeting itself was difficult, but it's kind of what's been going on for a long time now. And, I think I'm ready for it at this point. But you never really get used to hearing about how bad you are. really. It always hurts, and the death threats obviously have always hurt my feelings. I've just kind of gotten to the point where I can cope with it. It's not so much that I'm, okay with it happening, but I'm able to cope with it now.
There's a congressperson, stand up to Peter Palumbo, and he said this about you. He said, you are an evil little thing, and you had to have a police escort take you to school. Have you responded to him?
I haven't responded to him directly, but the response so far to that comment it's almost a bit of a mockery. I feel it's immature and inappropriate for a state representative, who represents me also, by the way, to be calling me something as petty as an evil little thing. And so while it does kind of hurt a bit, we've kind of turned it into a joke.
I've heard about that. I got a friend who's now co-opted the phrase, I hope you trademark that evil little thing, right? And turn it into t-shirts that he's selling so that you can help fund your college education. Is that right?
That is right. There's a website where people have been purchasing the t-shirts, and I've seen lots of people at the meeting for them, and people take pictures of themselves wearing them and post them to Facebook so I can see. And I think it's really cute, and in a lot of ways I think his little comment has kind of backfired, because now we're using it as a positive thing. It's almost a way of saying that people stand with me. Just go.
That didn't happen with Nicole. It happened with Jessica, and I think that's a good thing. And I hope after all this, where do we go from here? Here's what I think is going to happen. I think you're going to see these numbers for high school groups and college groups and all. These are still going up. The high school group right now, like I said, I think it's at like 66 right now. I wouldn't be surprised if in a couple years there are even more high school groups than there are college groups, several hundred of them. That's gonna happen. And I hope that anyone in this, I hope I haven't said anything offensive. You'll tell me that in the Q&A, but I hope that everyone is kind of on board with the fact that, yeah, they have the right to have their group, even if you disagree with them, and that's something we all ought to support. Because high school especially is the age when people start thinking about their religion seriously. I mean, that's the age students get confirmed in their church. They might get born again at that age a lot of times. But it's also the same time a lot of people say, I stopped believing in God. And we ought to support their right to do that and talk about it and be open about that. So that's one thing that's going to happen. This is another interesting thing. There's been a push online and in the atheist community at large to get atheists to come out of the closet. Last week, I think it was last week, Senator Rob Portman said, he's a Republican, and he said, I support gay marriage. A Republican senator said, I support gay marriage. And why did he support it? He said, because my son is gay, and I've learned that, I don't want him to be denied those rights, so why would I deny that from anybody else? And it was that personal touch that really got him to change his opinion. And the same idea is kind of being pushed by the atheist community as well. Why are there all these people starting to lose their faith? Why are there people saying, atheists? One of the most interesting things is if you asked a couple decades ago, would you vote for someone of your political party if that candidate were blank? And they used to say, if they were African American, and that number used to be like really, really low. And then in the 70s or 80s, it got higher, and now it's in the upper 90s. Yeah, you have no problem voting for an African American person for president if they represent you. What about a woman? It used to be low, now it's in the upper 90s. No one really has a problem with that. For atheists, that number was always at the bottom of the list. And for several years, it was well under 50%. It was really, really low. And what happened is the last time they asked it during this last election, would you vote for someone if they were an atheist, but they were part of your political party? That number crossed 50% for the first time. That was huge news. More people were okay saying, if they're an atheist, I don't really care. And it was like, I would vote for a gay person, I would vote for a Muslim person, I would vote for an atheist. We were still kind of at the bottom, but it was more than half, and that's a big change. And this is an example of what atheists are doing. This is the Richard Dawkins Scarlet A, and he uses this in a campaign he calls the Coming Out campaign. If you wear this A, it's like a Scarlet A for good reason. It lets people know you're an atheist. It's possible no one knows what this means, but maybe they will ask you about it, and you could tell them about it. So on Facebook, on websites, even buttons and pins, you will see the Scarlet A. I don't even know if there are any back there at the table. There might be.
We have some buttons.
Buttons with the letter A on them.
Not that kind.
Not that kind?
Sorry.
It's all good. This is another thing on Facebook. People will change their profiles. sometimes. This was a campaign they did last year. Just have your profile picture on Facebook. Just say, you're an atheist and other stuff about you. So I'm an atheist, and gay, and loving, and moral, and fair. I'm an atheist that didn't comb his hair this morning. You can read that for yourself. I'm an atheist and I also speak Spanish. Hello, I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist and I love you. One of the most popular campaigns on college campuses is just setting up your atheist groups like Table with all the other organizations, and it just says, hug an atheist. And that's it. They're just like, hey, if you give us $1, which we'll donate to charity, we'll give you a hug. That's it. Or sometimes they will have baptized an atheist and they'll have a dunk tank and you can throw a ball, and that works too. But it's this idea of just coming out and saying, I'm proud to be an atheist, and there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, one of the things that's coming up in a couple weeks is a national event that's actually called Ask an Atheist Day, where people will set up tables at high schools and colleges with a sign that just says, ask us anything. You have a question for an atheist, you go to that table, you ask them. They're not going to be mean to you. They'll answer your question as honestly as they can. And it's all part of an effort to just let people know there are atheists in the area. There are atheists at your school, in your community, possibly in your family or extended family too. And this is a project that isn't out yet, but it's hopefully coming soon. There's been a movement to have like safe zones in a lot of high schools for gay and lesbian students to say, hey, if you're in here, I'm not going to tolerate bullying or no one's going to say like an epithet against gay people and get away with it. And we're trying to get the same thing happening in high schools as well, the secular safe zone. Hopefully that'll be out soon. But that's the big change that's been happening. So I hope when you're leaving here, more than anything else, I don't really care if you're atheist or not, but I hope you understand that there is an issue. And we've kind of seen it with gay and lesbian and transgender youth for years now, where they've been bullied and harassed, and it's getting a little better for them. And part of that is because they've had a lot of straight allies support them and defend their rights as well. I hope you realize that the same thing is kind of happening for atheists too, and I hope you'll defend them as well. So thank you for having me, and if there's any questions I can answer, I'd love to answer them.
Does anyone have a question for Hemant? Comment?
Yeah? So maybe we can give the microphone.
I'm just curious, like, were you always an atheist, or like, did you ever grow up with any like people giving you a hard time for being an atheist?
Sure. So did I grow up always as an atheist, and did anyone give me a hard time as an atheist? I was raised as a Jain, which is an Indian religion. It's not quite as popular as Hinduism, but it believes in nonviolence, vegetarianism, things like that. They also believe in heaven and hell and karma and reincarnation. And when I started questioning it, that's the stuff that I kind of drew the line at, and that's when I became an atheist. I've actually been pretty fortunate in that I didn't tell people I was an atheist for a long time until I was well into college, and by then, my friends didn't really care, so it was okay for me. I didn't really tell people in high school that much. But to be fair, like when I applied for a job teaching at a public school, all my leadership, all the cool things I've done that I would want to put on my resume, they all had to do with atheist type of stuff. I've written a book about atheism. Like I didn't put any of that on there because I didn't know how it would go over. But I feel that if I could have said I volunteer with my church the same way, that would have been seen as a really good thing and might have helped me get some jobs. But I was kind of afraid to say that. I'm not saying that would have happened, but that was a real fear. And I've gotten so many emails from people that said, I left a comment on your blog many years ago. And their comment wasn't anything bad or malicious or anything. They said, I'm looking for jobs. Can you please delete the comment I made 3 years ago so that they don't Google my name and find that? But that sort of thing happens. So I think I've been lucky, but I have heard from many, many people who are not as fortunate. Yes? Can we hear you? Oh, okay, there we go. It's working.
Great, thank you. I'm an Eagle Scout, and I wouldn't have ever actually earned that award had I been an outed atheist at the time.
Yeah.
Not really a whole lot of people know this, but similar to homosexuals, atheists aren't welcome in scouting. And additionally, I was actually recently fired from my job for what I believe are religious reasons, although that's a little hard to prove because of the situation. And I think a lot of those things that have happened and are happening are results of these really widespread negative ideas about atheists that we're immoral or evil. Now, the safe zones and the Ask an Atheist Day and the Scarlet Letter idea, they're great, but I mean, they seem kind of like small steps.
They're little band-aids. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hadn't heard of them ever before just now. So I mean, they don't seem to be very impactful as far as a widespread type thing. So I wanted to know what your thoughts were of why there's not really a widespread awareness program to deal with this myth that we're bad people, or if one would be like soon forthcoming.
I think the way you kind of get people to realize that this is just as much of an issue as some of the other minority groups that have been discriminated against for various reasons, the biggest way to do it is to raise people's consciousness about it. As a society, we've done that kind of with LGBT issues. So that's why the Boy Scouts is now considering changing that rule that says you can't be gay and in the Boy Scouts. They may drop that policy that says you can't be gay in the Boy Scouts. They are not even thinking about dropping the requirement that you have to believe in a higher power and be a Boy Scout. Atheists are still not allowed in the Boy Scouts. Now, how do you change that sort of thing? How do you prevent that sort of harassment? It involves more people coming out. It involves more people knowing an atheist and realizing that whatever stereotypes they have about them are probably not true and probably far from the truth. I don't think there's one thing any one person can do. It's kind of this collective. The more people who come out, the more, you were seeing that slideshow before this presentation of people, celebrities who are atheists. As more of them start talking about it, as more of us start coming out if you are an atheist, it just slowly spreads. And eventually it's coming to the point where it's going to be very hard to say something. I mean, I've heard this so many times when people are running for president from all parties. That, this is a God-believing country, this is a Christian nation, or, I believe in a higher power, and that's where I get my morals from. That sort of thing, we don't call people out on that as much, or at least the media doesn't. As more people start to say, I'm an atheist, and I'm good, and I can be good without God, and there's nothing wrong with me, you're going to start seeing more of that pushback. Right now, we're not the focus. But as more people start coming out in various ways, and again, it's very different for the younger generation that is growing up with a lot of people at school who they know are atheists, who are on Facebook, who are seeing these campaigns happen on Facebook, where there are so many people who have their religious preference on Facebook listed, and may not be atheist, but it's some variant of that. It's agnostic, it's a nun, it's Pastafarianism, if you believe in the flying spaghetti monster. The more that happens, it's like, oh, well, why would I have any problem with someone who doesn't believe in this stuff? It's not a thing, any one of these things, the little band-aids will fix, but as you start doing them, give it a couple generations, I feel like that's where we're headed. To the point where not believing in a particular religion, or not believing in God in general, it won't be seen as much of a liability as it is right now. At least that's where I hope we're going with it, and that's what I'm seeing online anyway. I'm seeing this huge mass growing in that direction.
Right on, thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, so I haven't read your book. I think it would be really interesting too. But how was that experience in Seattle, and what were your thoughts from it?
This is from the pastor who sent me to the churches?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he sent me, thanks for the question, the pastor sent me to what he figured would be a good cross-section of the church. So he sent me to like a mega church, like a big evangelical mega church. He sent me to a huge black Protestant church on the south side of Chicago. I went to a guy's living room because he was just starting his church. I went to a Catholic mass too. So it was kind of cool seeing all these things. I guess in my head, before I went into it, if you asked me what church is like, I probably would have told you like Reverend Lovejoy from The Simpsons, just monotonous, boring. And when you see like, you go to the evangelical megachurches that have a lot of money, and they have good speakers because they can bring them in, it's awesome. Like the way they tell a story, the way they get their message across, unbelievable. I encourage atheist groups, like if you're not sure what to do with your meetings, go to a local church and then talk about it afterwards. It's an awesome experience. When I went to like the black church on the south side of Chicago, totally different experience because they weren't talking about the Bible as much. They were talking about social justice issues, and I totally agreed with the stuff they were talking about there. So totally different experience. And none of these churches knew I was coming there, so I was really like, I was just a stranger in the room, kind of sitting by myself somewhere. But you know, at all the places, they treated me like, oh, you're a stranger at our church. Cool, let me show you around, let me talk to you. If I had questions, I could be sitting randomly in the crowd, just ask someone a question next to me, and I knew they weren't going to treat me like crap, just because I didn't go there normally. So it was an awesome experience as a learning experience. Where I got really upset, I guess, is at some of the churches, they said things that I totally disagree with. That's not a surprise. There were some churches where they said, you know, if you pray for certain things to happen, everything will get better. Like if your back is hurting, pray and it'll get better. And I'm just sitting there like, just tell them to go see a doctor. At least mention that. Doctor and prayer, but don't leave that first part out. There were some churches where they, you know, equated drug addiction and pornography addiction with Harry Potter witchcraft and like stuff like that. And I'm like, I lost you somewhere down this line. So, but here's the thing. I think before going there, I probably would have had the spectrum of what church is like this. And when I went, I realized it was way broader than I ever thought. I realized there were a lot more liberal Christian churches than I ever even knew about. And yeah, some of the stereotypes I had about what churches were like, that really was out there. But it was a really good experience to see it firsthand and not hear about it from former Christians or current Christians. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whenever you went, did you honestly say that you were an atheist? Did they know that you were going to be there?
So, did anyone know I was an atheist at the church? Most of the bigger churches know. I didn't tell them I was coming. The only one I told I was coming there as an atheist was the guy whose church was a living room, because that would have been creepy. So he knew and he didn't tell the people who were there, so that was nice of him. So yeah, they didn't know. They were, and I went to services that were designed to be like seeker services. That were designed for people who don't normally go to their church, if they have those services available. So I was hearing the pitch that they wanted to make to me. None of them stuck. But it was really, it was a really awesome learning, yeah, like I said, it was a really good experience learning about that.
I'd be very interested to see you redo it and go in there and see how it would.
I wonder how it would change. Yeah, that would be very interesting. And one of the places, the pastor told this congregation I was going to be there, and they decided to have one of their sermons where it would just be me and the pastor on stage. He would ask all the questions, but in a way that's kind of like what you just asked, like, what is it like? I'm not trying to convert you, just let me ask you some questions about what you learned. And then they took questions from the audience, but they, just to be fair, they filtered them, because they didn't know what they were going to get. And the pastor asked me what he thought were fair, good questions, and they really were. As a thank you to me for coming there, he gave me all of the questions, including the ones that got filtered out that he didn't ask. So some of them were like, are you an atheist because I don't know, you don't have a relationship with your father? Like stuff like that. Like, do you just want to like get drunk and kill people all the time because you don't have anything stopping you from doing that? I mean, those are legitimate thoughts some people had that the pastor was nice enough to just say, I'm not going to ask that. That's a silly question. So, yeah. Other questions? One in the back.
What did your parents say when you told them that you were an atheist, and how
What
would
did
you
my parents say
suggest?
when I told them I was an atheist? So it happened, like I said, like well into college. I had an inkling that they kind of knew, but it was disappointment for sure. Mind you, this is like a decade ago at least. They're still disappointed. They're still upset. The only thing that's different is now we just got to the point where we stopped arguing about it, and it's just like, all right, we're just going to leave it be. We won't discuss it. They don't tell me you have to go to this temple service anymore. They know that, oh, I'm going to have a wedding soon, but it's not going to be a religious wedding, and they're not like forcing that on me, but it's not something we discuss that much. I think the thing that made them at least kind of be okay with it is that, one, I'm still a vegetarian, and that's a big deal to them. And two, like, they kind of figured out that, oh, I really hadn't changed from when they thought I was religious to when they knew I was not. I was pretty much the same person, and that kind of helped ease that transition too. It's not like I started doing hard drugs the moment I told them I became an atheist. So, I mean, they're still a little weirded out by it because they're not used to it, but that's fine.
How would you suggest someone bring that up with their parents? What do you think the
How would I
best way
suggest
that
someone
is?
bring that up to their parents carefully? It depends on a few things. How much control does their parents have over their lives? Are they living at home? Are they dependent on their parents, for a lot of things? If that's the case, your parents you may not want to tell them. If you're independent and on your own, maybe there's no harm in telling them. But I know a lot of people who are married with kids, and they still don't want to tell their parents. And they still are afraid of coming out to their family. There are people who have gotten married when they were religious, and then one spouse became an atheist, and they don't want to tell their spouse. It's kind of just an independent thing. Like, if you think it's going to make a difference, then you got to figure out a way to come out to the right people at the right time. Hopefully, it's not going to be a big deal, and then in which case, maybe it's just better to keep it to yourself. It's very hard. It's one of those, I imagine it's very similar to coming out if you're gay or lesbian, because it's not like you just come out to everyone at once. It takes a long time for a lot of people. But it's kind of the same thing. Like, you got to feel it out and figure out when it's best for the people in your life. I'm fortunate that at least my close friends totally were fine with it. And then slowly word spread out to my family and stuff later on. And thankfully I've been an atheist for 5 or 6 years before they ever heard it. There's a question over there.
I walked away, so I apologize if
That's
you
all right.
answered this already. But how do you differentiate between religious oppression and a-religious oppression? Let me clarify that.
Yeah.
There's the religious oppression in this country that gay and lesbians, can't get married as of yet in many states. But using an example you used with the placard in the school, the a-religious oppression of taking that down, the non-obligation for someone to believe that, as opposed to putting up an a-religious placard next to it.
Yeah. So if I understand your question, it may be anti-atheist discrimination to say we're a Christian school and say the Bible over the loudspeaker, but isn't it anti-religious to not have it? And what's the deal with that? Yes. Okay. So I guess the answer to that is what I am fighting for, and what a lot of atheists that I see anyway are fighting for, is not a promotion of anything. When Michael Newdow, over a decade ago, tried to fight to get under God out of the pledge, that was a big controversy because they were like, oh, he's trying to take God out of the Pledge of Allegiance. And his argument was that says everyone is religious. We're all a nation under God. And he tried to take that out. And people said, well, you're taking it out. You're being unfair to Christians. I would say the argument is he wasn't trying to replace that with saying we're one nation under no God. It's not like Jessica Alquist was saying, let's take that religious mural on the wall and replace it with a mural that says God doesn't exist, you're on your own, good luck. She was saying, well, that's promoting religion. The school, the government, ought to be neutral on religious issues. If you're religious and you're the mayor, fine, whatever. But when you're when you're running the city council meeting, you should not spend time doing a Christian prayer. Instead, you should just let people pray on their own time, and then when you're at a government meeting, do what they got to do. If you're at a high school graduation, don't do a prayer, but we're not asking you to say God doesn't exist either. We're just saying, don't promote religion or non-religion. Stay neutral on the matter. That's how I see it. I think we're fighting for neutrality, where I think Christians, for the most part, because that's what these issues are against, I think the ones who are fighting those battles are saying it should be okay to promote their version of God. And I think if we were talking about a Muslim group trying to put up a sign that said, praise Allah or something, you would see a whole different argument. But that never happens. It's always Christians who want to promote God, and atheists saying you can't promote God. You don't have to promote what we believe, but you can't do that. So that's why I feel I'm on the right side of this by saying the government ought to stay neutral on these issues. But that's the argument you get from the other side, which is that somehow taking that away, or saying we shouldn't have in God we trust on our dollar bills, somehow that's anti-Christian. I don't see it as anti-Christian. I see it as just being neutral on the. I hope that answers your question. Yes?
So if you have children, are you going to allow them to have the opportunity to have religious background, or is it going to be
So if I have children, will I let them kind of choose their own path on this issue?
Not even that, but expose them to allow them the opportunity to be exposed to.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a great question. So this is a debate that kind of happens, at least in the atheist community. How do you raise your kids, especially if both parents are not religious? I don't have kids. I hope that when I do, Obviously, I don't go to church, and my wife won't. She doesn't go to church either. But I do want to expose them to what other people believe, because their friends are going to be religious. They're going to be in a religious society too. They have to be exposed to it, because they got to know what other people think and believe, and they got to respect that. Now, the question is, what happens? Let me give you an example. A friend of mine has written a book about raising kids as an atheist parent. And he said his daughter, 6-year-old, I think, came home from school one day, and she said, because she was talking to her friends, "Daddy, I believe in heaven." And he's an atheist, so what does he do? He says, "Oh, interesting. Why?" And she answers, "Here's why I believe in that." "Oh, interesting. Let me follow that up with another question." And he kind of just pokes holes in anything she says. And then the next day or 2 days later, she came home and she said, "Daddy, I don't think I believe in heaven anymore." And he's like, "Oh, why?" And just pokes holes in that too, because his goal is to teach her to just ask questions and keep thinking about this stuff. The last thing he wants to do, and I think I would follow his path too, last thing I want to do is force my religious views on my kids. Let them come to their own conclusions, but at the same time, I want to make sure that I'm being devil's advocate, because I think that's a better role for me to play than for them to just like, "Hey, God doesn't exist, and if you say religious things in the house, I'm going to get mad." That's not going to work. And if anything, that's going to push them toward religion. Like, I want them to read the Bible, because I think that's going to make them atheists. So, let's expose them to all the religions. Let's show them that all religions are pretty much alike. And I think they're going to come to my conclusion anyway. So, but yeah, I definitely want to expose them to it, because if anything else, they're going to be around religious people their entire lives. It's healthy and good to know what other people believe. And it's good to know, like, hey, look, this is what these people believe, but you got to respect their right to have those beliefs. And by all means, have a dialogue, have a conversation and debate, and talk about who's right and who's wrong. That's fun. That's awesome. Go ahead. But you got to find a way to just not be a jerk about it too. Yeah. There's a question back there.
No, you're fine. I have 2 questions. The first one is, just went on my head. Okay, the first question is, have you ever seen something happen or had an experience that couldn't be explained? Like you were just like, I just don't get it. Like, how did this happen?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
And what's the second? I'll answer that. What's the second question?
Okay. Well, then that question is kind of a 2-in-1. Like, where do you go from there when you have those kinds of experiences?
Yeah, so I guess the question is have I ever experienced anything coincidental or miraculous, and how do I explain that? Mm-hmm. It's hard. Here's what I can tell you. Yeah, I've experienced it, like everyone here, I've experienced a lot of things that I may not have a good explanation for. Mm-hmm. Where I go with that is, I feel like there may not be a good explanation for it. Sometimes coincidences happen. And sometimes the answer's there and I just don't know what it is. But maybe I can find it if I tried hard enough or if I knew enough information. What I don't do is to say, I don't know how this happened, so I'm going to assume God did it. That's not the first place I turn to. The question is, well, is there a better explanation for it? And maybe the answer is, I will never know what the explanation. If you ask me, where does the universe come from? I have no idea. I don't think the default response then should be, well, then God created. I think it's possible that we may never know the answer, or that we just don't have enough information yet to answer that. But yeah, that happens all the time. Those weird things that happen in your life and you can't explain it, happens all the time. And it's just a matter of, kind of shifting that thinking to say, well, if God's not the answer, are there other answers to be found? And that's a huge shift. If you ask anyone who's been religious and became not religious, that's the hardest thing to go from. I remember hearing a play by Julia Sweeney. She did a play where she talks about her Catholic upbringing and then losing her faith. And the first thoughts that go through her head when she admits to herself she doesn't believe in God, she's like, well, God doesn't exist. Why aren't we all killing each other? Oh, right, we wouldn't want to live in a society like that. Well, if God doesn't exist, what's holding the earth in space? Oh, right, gravity. She has to kind of go through and rethink all these things that she thought God was the answer to, but she realizes, oh, there may be other answers out there.
Okay, and I just remember the second question. I know that you talked a lot about experiences with people in the church and why a lot of young people stay away from the church, but a lot of those ideas came from people and you know, people kind of destroyed the central message. Have you ever thought about, or have you ever tried, like in your experience with your own religion, like seeking God out for yourself and saying, okay, well, forget what everyone else is saying. Let me try. If there really is a God out there, let me see it.
Yeah, okay, so a lot of the, like, some of the things like hypocrisy, that's just people acting bad. That may not be what Christianity or any religion is all about. Here's right, there is a thing called like Pascal's wager, which says, aren't you better off just believing? Because why not? Or give it a shot. It's very hard for me to imagine that if God exists, that me just saying, all right, I'll give this a shot, even though I'm not sincerely like believing in God, I don't think that's something God would want. And that's a matter of which God do I pray to. Do I pray to this God or one of the other millions of gods out there? Which one is right? And it just goes back to more questions and like which route is the right one. I grew up religious. I mean, even though it wasn't a main majority faith, I grew up believing in God. So I mean, I know what that's like, and I know what that experience feels like. I know what it's like to pray when you're, you know, going through rough times or just praying at night or something. So I've been there, and it's just a matter of, all right, I pretty much convinced myself that there's no reason to do that anymore. And I haven't come across anything since that's made me reconsider that. Believe me, I've met a lot of awesome religious people who totally understand what you're saying about, like, you know, a lot of people may not speak for Christ, or they may not do what Jesus wants. Don't follow them. Follow what the Bible says. Follow what Jesus says. That's all well and good. But at the same time, even if they are following him, it doesn't mean I agree that that's the right path or that's the truth. So I hope that answers it. Is there? There's one over here.
My question is, like, your extended family,
Yeah.
like beyond mom, that related, all said not being anymore?
So my extended family, relatives, are they upset about it? You know what was surprising? When I grew up, actually after I came out as an atheist, to my parents anyway, we'd go to like family parties or weddings or something, and my mom would actually get to the point, she's like, have you talked to that person over there? They're an atheist too, you'll be friends, go. If that happened, I actually had an uncle like find some article that appeared somewhere or something, he's like, I saw what you wrote, I agree. Like, that happened, that was surprising to me, because they're really serious in their church involvement, their temple involvement. So I've actually had positive reactions, and if there are any negative ones, they haven't told them to me.
I formally Catholic after my mom said, at first my grandmother died because he was coming at me. My close friend that comes from almost Pakistan,
Yeah.
he's never talked to me. He knows me long, but he doesn't talk to him for safety reasons.
Yeah.
He's not really sure it's my family. If I were to come out, probably react the same way.
Yeah, and this is going back to that whole issue, like, yeah, especially, yeah, there was an article a couple days ago online where a reporter profiled a Muslim woman who was an atheist. She had to leave her home because of the repercussions with her family, because they certainly didn't want anything to do with her, and she was afraid for her safety. And you know what, my grandfather, super religious, very old, he kind of knows, but he's devastated by it. But every time he sees me, he's still just saying religious stuff. It's like, we'll have that conversation, that's fine. It's not going to convince me. But again, you know what? If it is going to like really kill your family members or just hurt them emotionally, maybe, yeah, they don't have to know. They don't need to know. It's better off maybe if they don't. But hopefully they're not the ones like controlling your life or affecting your life to that extent where it's, you know, they have to know. Yeah. Better off then. Well, if there are any other questions, by the way, my contact information is there. I will do my best to respond to anyone who writes to me, so please feel free to ask me anything if you didn't get a chance to, and I'll be around here for a while.
And the SSA would like to invite anyone who had any questions or wants to discuss what they saw tonight. Our meeting is this Thursday